Good morning. So, welcome at the World of Sports here at Adidas. I hope you had a great dinner already last night. Even so, they actually closed the doors at 11. You couldn't continue till late, but that's maybe better for this morning to be awake and concentrated around all these exciting topics that we'll have to discuss today. And actually, it's Wilson over there. So Wilson, he's part of the enterprise architecture team sitting in Portland. I'm really happy he's here with us. And I was just joking in the beginning. I said, you know, if we combine that device with a little bit of artificial intelligence, I can stay home and have just this piece coming on stage and doing all these speeches. And I'm looking forward to that age where we can actually do even more with technology. And coming back to the day today, is it LeanIX? Is it LeanIX? Maybe some people haven't really been concentrated when they learned Roman numerals, so it could also be Lean9, but that would be a wrong interpretation. So I stay a little bit with the English pronunciation, LeanIX, but we have the same issue with Adidas, because in the US everybody says adidas, so there's a different pronunciation in different languages. But LeanIX or LeanIX, I think we were joking this morning, both is okay. So how do we start the day? It's a soft start. I don't want to bore you with generic facts around how many people work here and what's the square meter of space, but actually get a little bit into the topic, how important enterprise architecture is and was in the past 2 years when I actually started and have the honor to lead the IT team at Adidas. And I think there's some fundamental shift that we did, and I will actually guide you through how we came to shifting left with regard to what we're doing in enterprise architecture. So at Adidas, we have one core belief, and that core belief is that through sports, we have the power to change lives. And to change lives, I think, is something which is fundamental with regard to when we look into not only doing sports and move yourself for whatever behavioral reason, it's also to bring people together, bring cultures together, bring people together to have fun, to do sport, also to watch sport, to be fans as well. So we really believe as a company that through what we do, that we have the power to change lives of people. And to do that, we also said that we want to be the best sports company in the world. And the best sports company in the world isn't defined by us and how we define best, but we want to be measured how others see us. And we want to be measured around what customers say, what consumers say, and also what partners say about us. And that's what makes us the best sports company. And this is, I think, a fundamental shift that we started a few years back by really putting the consumer and our customers into the center of all that we do, because we are all measuring ourselves now against NPS numbers, and we are following those through to make sure that we all stay on track with putting the consumer into the center of all of our decisions and all of our doing. So how do we achieve that? 2 years ago, we came out, or even more, it's more than 2 years now, we came out with our strategy, our strategic business plan, Creating the New. Creating the New is there to actually make our mission statement happen, to become the best sports company. And this isn't about beating Nike or beating Under Armour. This is about what we have set our path to be by what the consumer says to us. And we have said that in the past, where we have looked very simplistic towards two numbers, 17 as revenue and 11 as the profitability of the company, we have turned this upside down. We said, when we create brand desire, when we keep our brand heat up, that is when we ultimately also will turn the financial numbers into the right direction. So by focusing on changing the way how we work in our culture, the way we look at success by being measured through what others say about us, and being focused around three elements, speed, cities, and open source, we will create this brand desire, which then helps us to not actually only grow the top line or market share, or expanding our gross margin or operating leverage. Actually, it's all those three in the correct balance. So we are looking at those financial numbers as a result of whether we have been successful in creating this brand desire. And when it comes to digital, we haven't had, I would say, a head start over a lot of you, where you started maybe earlier. Maybe you see it differently from the outside-in perspective, but we are actually thought we're a little bit late in there and actually really making sure what digital means to Adidas. And we are very clear. We have a strategic business plan. We don't need a second strategy or a third strategy. We said it has to be anchored in our strategic business plan to create the brand desire. And when we went back and said that's where the company started with Adolf Dassler back in the 40s of the 19th century. It is where he was sitting next to the athlete, where he was personally taking care of creating the best footwear and the best apparel for our athletes to accelerate their journey as an athlete and to make them better every day. He was really there on the pitch in Bern in actually helping the German team to have the best boots that you could have at that time. But how do you do this today? 15,000 kilometers down to Australia, hundreds of millions of touch points with our consumers every day, distributed across almost 150 markets or countries around the world. And that's where we came back and said, if we believe that through sport that we have the power to change lives, then we have to build those direct relationships with our consumers, almost like Adi Dassler did back then when he started the company. But how do you do that at that scale? And that's where we came back to the digital elements and said the best way to build those direct relationships with our consumers is through digital. And that's when the whole journey started for us to say is, what are our digital priorities? Where do we want to invest? How do we build those relationships? Everything we do has to be in relation to creating benefits for our consumers and customers. And that's how we anchored digital back into our strategic business plan, Creating the New. And we all know these statements that I show up here, it has all long arrived in our private lives. And it's funny when I always talk to my wife, she gets furious about all these website trackers and how do people know that I did that. And it's hard to explain that this is actually something good and this is about consumer experience and being personalized in the way how you see AdWords and how you're guided through your web journey. She's not yet there, but I'm still trying to convince her that's a good thing. But let's see how this ends. But we also have seen significant change in how digital has changed the way how we operate every day. And this is not just about technology. It's also about, how do you recruit the right talent? What are the capabilities we require moving ahead? How do we use technology also to personalize the way how we speak to each other within the company, but also with our consumers and customers? How do we actually address certain problems of our industry that haven't changed over the last 40 or 50 years of having a lead time of almost 18 months between a design brief and actually a product hitting our stores and hitting our consumer? How can we change the paradigm of that industry? And there's a lot of great examples where we have moved with very bold moves, talking about Speed Factory that went live in Ansbach. We just brought those products to the market in Made for London and Made for New York coming. We actually look at really changing the way how we produce product, not just in Asia, but also in the consumer market through fully automated shoe manufacturing, and actually also looking into how can we do the same thing for apparel. But we're also looking internally at all of our processes and say, where is an opportunity to really change the way how we have been working in the past, and how can technology actually help us to do that? And this is where, and I will come later to that, for us, enterprise architecture had to be redefined because they have a whole new task within our company that they have actually to fulfill today. So when we started this journey, and now I'm actually taking 2 steps back, there was basically a statement that McKinsey gave us a few years back. And I said, guys, you're really great. You have a highly industrialized, cost-efficient, one-size-fits-all IT. And when I started my job 2 years ago, I was looking at that statement and I was like, oh my God, is that really what we want? Is that really how we drive the digital transformation, how we personalize, how we work with our consumers? Is this really what will be the value add that we have within adidas as an IT organization? And when I went back and I said, actually, it's not too bad, because it actually fits exactly to our old strategic business plan, which was about 17 billion and 11% profitability. It was really about driving top line and profitability. But now we changed. All of a sudden, we talk about consumer centricity, brand desire, being fast, changing the way how we interact with our consumers. So at that point in time, we looked at this statement and said, yes, it was perfect for the last 5 years, but it will not help us to carry us to the benefits of creating the new and achieving our mission to be the best sports company in the world. And that's when we basically started to change our destiny. That's when we started to actually embark on a new journey. Driving, creating the new, and I said it is about not only consumer centricity, by that, driving business value creation. And I have always long talks with my team, and it started with Markus, who is our head of enterprise architecture and a co-host here today for this event. And I said, Markus, it's fantastic. Your target was to create 12 standards this year, and have great policies in place. Well, what's the value of that? Nobody's looking at it. Nobody cares about what you're putting on paper and hiding somewhere in our intranet. So how do we change that paradigm of actually creating something that has value for the organization? How do we shift from creating overhead to creating value? And that's when we started, and I'm not sure it's an artificial word that I came up with or whether it's really the right word, but I said, Markus, you need to create consumables. I don't measure you on the amount of policies and standards that you deliver. I will measure you how many people will use that and actually say, that's a great benefit because it makes my world much easier than it was in the past. And that's where we started that journey and really defined also on how we want to attack those challenges. Standardizing our operating model. And in the context of IT, and our IT agenda in the context of creating the new really was about how do we drive simplicity and operational excellence in our current infrastructure and system landscape. It was vital to really understand is how many people work there, why do they work there, what's the benefit they're giving to the organization. And there's a lot of benefit in running back-end SAP ERP systems and having them standardized across the world on a defined process template. Clear, there's benefits. It drives efficiencies into the organization. But again, how can technology help us to automate these tasks? How can we actually use bots for our service desk? How can we actually really simplify on our architecture also by taking systems out and actually simplifying the way how we connect those systems and the data flows? But it was also a big debate about sourcing and finding the right sourcing mix. Where do we want to deploy our internal people to create value? And where do we really talk about transactional tasks that we can outsource or right away automate in driving and shifting our management attention, but also our internal workforce towards the second pillar? And the second pillar really was dedicated to create and engineer the digital tomorrow. And the digital tomorrow for us, there was a lot of topics where we said, that's a huge opportunity to go greenfield, to do things really in a different way how we have done them in the past. So under this section, we really looked into how do we transform from a full waterfall model that we had across all our project portfolio to agile at scale. How do we do that? Where do we find the right talent and the support from our partners to drive this really hard? Because again, end of the day, it's nice to do that in IT, but you don't have a product owner or don't have somebody on the other side in the business teams understanding what their contribution to this is. It's useless. It will just end in a chaos. And the most, I think, the biggest statement I always heard from our business partners, Michael, IT needs to get faster. It's too slow. You know, we have our requirements. 1 year later, we come to testing, and then, you know, we figured out it's not really what we wanted, and, you know, the world has changed. Maybe, you know, can you do some late adjustments to what we have? And we ended up in making compromises. Yeah? So now driving into agile, okay, fantastic, but do you know that you need to define your products, that you have to be much more disciplined about the process, that you have to be much more across the whole project lifecycle involved in what we need to do? And that's when people said, okay, there's a price to pay in shifting. And I think we have a perfect, not perfect world, but almost perfect world in the way how we defined where to follow the classic waterfall models, but also where the benefits of Agile really hit the organization. And the second piece was, we looked at how do we actually build applications going forward? How do you create competitive advantage and value just by deploying off-the-shelf software, whether this is on-premise or as a software as a service model? We believe that there is a lot of space, specifically within adidas, where we can create competitive advantage by developing our own applications that nobody else can access. But where to build? How do we do this? That's when we embarked on the journey of actually creating what we called our open digital platform and really said is, let's go cloud. Let's go maybe Amazon, maybe Azure, maybe Google, but let's figure out how we build this. And from the first step, let's figure out how we actually build it. We didn't want to have everybody just going online, taking their credit cards, booking a service, and then doing something that we then have to stitch back together at the end of the day. We clearly said, let's build the cloud canvas, let's build a clear and simple model, and also advisory and consulting services out of enterprise architecture and global IT that helps people to understand what the best platform is and what is the framework that we will use. And I will come to what Kubernetes means and containerized development, and maybe we talk about serverless now as the next step. But there have been clear rules that have been set how we want to deal in building those differentiating applications that actually give us a competitive edge at the end. But then we said, okay, fantastic. So we have the old world and then we have the new world. Yeah, super. Now we are back to what all these consulting companies were talking about, two-speed IT. I'm not a believer in that. I'm not a believer in two-speed or bi-model IT. I'm a believer of we need to develop both sides at the same speed and make sure we can also connect them. We need to have access to the data that we create through our transactional systems. We have to utilize the investments and the assets that we have as a company, as well as building new applications. So let's figure out how we synchronize the speed of those two worlds without compromising on the one or the other side. And the key enabler here really for me is people. Who do we have? What are the capabilities? And where do we have gaps? Gaps, usually you go and outsource and you find somebody on the market and hire them, but this isn't what we wanted to do. We really wanted also in that way source smartly. Start and try to reduce the allocation of people into what we call our standardized operating model towards engineering the digital tomorrow. So we started on the journey and I was vocal about it. I want to become the fastest learning IT organization on this planet. And I mean this really as I say it, because I think that explains also not just that you need to learn as an individual, but that you need to learn as an organization to move ahead and be competitive in the world ahead of us. And there's a very simple way to do that, is actually by changing the way how we lead, drive simplicity into the way how we work, in actually pushing down decision-making in the organization, help people and individuals in actually moving into new capabilities. And bringing all of that together then really will also help us to become the fastest learning IT organization on this planet. So to summarize this slide, stability and simplicity. I saw there's an agenda topic as well this morning on simplicity. Digital capabilities and innovation. How do we create competitive advantage through the usage of technology, but then being focused as we are in our strategic business plan about our consumer, being focused about our people and our employees in the organization and help them to do that transformation as well. So I mentioned already a few topics around the role of architecture and enterprise architecture in our organization. Because traditionally, there was a certain set of stakeholders. We created a certain set of policies and standards and guidelines. There wasn't a lot of value. People felt they are forced through quality gates. But then we shifted that completely and said, let's create value and let's create a different way of enterprise architecture in the organization, because these are actually the people that have the deepest technical expertise in our organization. So their value is not in the policies and standards. Their value is in helping others doing the right things. And this is a huge shift that the team has to undergo, and we actually have a very lean, not LeanIX, lean enterprise architecture organization, which is only 10 people. But we also have domain architects sitting with the individual IT teams, and we have another 60 or so solution architects really working in dedicated areas. So it's a federated architecture team that we actually use and that come together and jointly create what we feel has value for the organization. So it's not an overhead, it's not an ivory tower, it's a federated, very collaborative structure that also helps to actually bring things up from the bottom, from the teams that actually work on very specific solution cases, but also provide the governance and the guidance and the help top down when it comes to actually sticking to what we have defined as being our cloud foundation. Now, this goes a little bit into now a lot of words on the slides, and don't read all of that, what you see there. It just explains a little bit what I've said already, how we shifted from the traditional approach of actually working with stakeholders to a much wider audience of stakeholders that actually the team is talking today. It's about external customers, it's about product teams that we have created in digital, but it's also with vendors, it's about assessing elements that we want to bring to our technology landscape. They actually look at partners and evaluate whether technology makes sense to bring it in-house. So there's a lot of new stakeholders the team has to actually deal with. So the topic here is that from the traditional IT tech talk, we shift towards a much more business-focused conversation, which takes into account the company strategic business plan, the company processes, and actually business model, and then brings the technology into that conversation. And that's where we have changed also basically the fields of play in which enterprise architecture at Adidas is currently working on, from a pure governance function towards a strategic business enabler. And I think you see that on the slides. Don't read all these words. There's a lot of new tasks that we actually saw coming to our enterprise architecture team. And that is where we involve enterprise architecture in our most critical projects. There's no big project, there's no project with a consumer impact or big project for us internally where we have not enterprise architecture there from the beginning in working on those joint designs and how it actually fits into our current world. The standards are still there. So don't understand me wrong. We don't want to create wild, wild west, and each time we basically reinvent the wheel. We do have still governance. We do still have our standards. And we do understand where we want to be from a target architecture perspective. But that isn't anymore only the core task. The core task has really shifted in becoming a strong business partner for a variety of stakeholders internally, but also externally. So, and this summarizes it a little bit, focus on business outcomes, focus on consumables, focus and measure how we create value for the organization. Understand what done means. Because actually we can say, oh, I did my job, I did the review, I actually gave it a tick, so let's get out so people can start deploying. So what does really mean the job was done? Have we really understand the problem? Have we really designed the right target architecture for our project? And that is where we have this constant feedback loop that actually comes through the federated approach that we have taken for our architects in Adidas. Service offerings, and we'll come to the next slide. There's a huge new variety of things that we need to do in a different way of also the language that we use in these conversations. And the governance at the end of the day isn't a forced governance, but the governance comes through that collaboration. And if we look into digital cultures or successful digital companies, it is clear that there is certain core elements in those companies which actually make those transformations successful. And we have not only in IT, but company-wide defined the 3 C's as the culture and the behaviors that we want to foster within Adidas. So it's about confidence, it's about collaboration, but it's also about creativity. And it's not about creativity, what's the next flying shoe and can we have sensors and energy harvesting in the midsole. It's really about creativity when it comes to how can we do things differently? How can we speed up things? How can we reduce costs by looking at things and challenge ourselves on a daily basis? But collaboration is vital because nowadays it's not anymore that I have just one person in the room I can talk to. Usually it's a bunch of people that all bring a certain background and experience. So those groups get bigger, the meetings get bigger. What does it usually mean? Slower decision-making processes. So collaboration in the sense not to actually create one opinion. It's not about creating consensus. It is actually about being clear about who's at the end of the day making the decision and what's the decision-making process. And once we have decided, everybody is committed in actually moving this decision through. And this is how our CEO, Kaspar Rohrstedt, always calls it, a decision is not the start of the negotiation period. Yeah? So that's an interesting aspect that we really also use in the way how enterprise architecture and our architects play a role in the organization. So the culture aspect, the behavioral aspects, and how we then help that to drive digital as well as the role that enterprise architecture plays, I truly believe is vital. That's why we also have put so much focus on the people aspect in specifically IT. So the tools that we need for this decision-making process, once we have clarified what a decision-making process is, but then I think that is one of the most important parts that we have seen over the last 12 months. We can have the greatest ideas, but where do you incubate those technologies with regard to creating value and scale them throughout the organization at the end of the day? And we have decided that the best place to do that is actually our architecture team. That is where we really want to incubate new technology, drive them to a level where we have not only proven that the concept works, but are also ready to scale it massively when we start rolling it out to the organization. So clearly, from shifting just from creating governance to something that really drives value into the organization. That's the architecture services. I'm not talking about those, but there's a huge bunch of things which are related actually to our transformation lifecycle. What I rather would like to talk to you about is the architecture principles, because that is where we made it very simple, and we basically said, how do we get back to 10 basic rules everybody can get in the organization? We talk about roughly 1,400 internal employees within Adidas, but we also talk about 2,500 externals that we deploy basically every day that help us in global IT to build towards the desired business outcomes. So how can we make absolutely crystal clear, not only to our internal staff, but also to our partners, of what we are trying to do here and what are the basic rules of the game when you actually go out there on the pitch and start coding and creating those applications. And at the end of the day, I think you all agree this is not miracles, but it's very fundamental to set those guardrails very clearly for the organization and not ending up in Wild Wild West as we have had the occasion here and there in the past also in Adidas. So simplify end to end. It's not just about your specific path of solution. And that is, I think, very vital. You have to think about the shadow of your actions that you create through your decisions. It's not just driven by your project targets in time, in scope, in budget. Actually, there's other elements and variables you have to take into consideration when building a sustainable and scalable solution for the organization. Consider data. Data, we all talk about it, but we're very clear. We have certain data points and domains defined within Adidas that we want to own, or at least co-own moving forward to become the best sports company and personalize not only our products, but also the experiences. Security by default. It's an easy said sentence, but I truly believe you all will agree it's not that easy to actually bring that back. But then when you start to actually incubate technology through enterprise architecture and the governance you have there, you can actually make sure that at least the technology foundation that you're built actually adheres to what we have set as a core principle. Reuse is always great. I haven't seen great cases where we have reused a lot of things, but this is actually where we go back into talking about APIs, microservices, and other elements, how we actually make those blocks a little bit smaller and move away from the tactical decision-making on point-to-point connections of system. So it's still a very important element. Whether reuse really is what we will achieve at the end of the day, let's see. But again, underlying, we really talk about changing the way how we integrate our data between different systems and end-to-end in our processes. And speed to value, we talked about that one as well. That is imminent, because if we want to change the way how the industry works, if we want to change the life cycle from a design to hitting the shelf from 18 months down to 12, down to 6, and maybe in some occasions to 24 hours, and that's where our speed factory model comes in, we now have a complete different way of how we address those challenges. And we can actually use these technologies to make this happen. But it's completely different whether you sell to your wholesale consumers in bulks and pallets and containers that you actually direct ship to their warehouses, or whether you create millions of pairs of footwear basically right there from the consumer interface where the design and the customization happens, and translate that into a lot size manufacturing in our speed factories. So there's fundamental principles that we have defined that really already started to really make a difference moving forward. And those core principles are basically non-negotiable in all of the discussions that we have when actually starting a new project. And summarizing it all up, because that's where you then also can enjoy a more deeper conversation around technology, about SAP HANA, about microservices. I saw the Deloitte booth up there, and APIs. And then I'm not anymore in your way in getting deeper into the technology conversation, because I think that's why you came here as well. So, key takeaways for us here at Adidas: measure and manage enterprise architecture and their services like a product line. That's at the end of the day what we do. It has to create value, it has to create output. It's almost like with a business case: if there's no value, don't do it. There's another downside of it, because if you always start to actually centralize all those teams, they become very big, and then it actually starts to deteriorate with regard to what you want to try to achieve. So actually, we found that the way of federating architecture capabilities in the organization really helps us to connect bottom up as well as top down, and actually not just communicate the standards in, but also gather the feedback on where we can change and create a higher value impact as well. Team collaboration and shared objectives. I think I touched that on our 3 Cs and the behaviors that we want to foster in Adidas, not just in Adidas IT. That is very vital. If your teams are not willing to start collaborating specifically on those topics, all the work you do there, it will be useless. And we are in the lucky position that we actually are known as an organization that is very collaborative. Now what we try to do is to work on the decision-making process as well as the commitment towards those decisions to become even stronger. And again, as I said, the benefits that we clearly see is that the number of services that we actually deliver out of the enterprise architecture team has increased. There's huge benefit of actually the organization seeing. So I can easily measure that by looking at the number of requests that get on the table of the team every day. And basically that is the challenge now. Why we have created a very nice model, we also have to make sure that the model itself stays a scalable model. So we need to invest, and we are investing into those capabilities moving forward. But the more we bring people in the organization also towards those new capabilities, I hope that, in this federated model, things can be done much more local than always going back through this model to our enterprise architecture team. So all overall, we made great progress by shifting the way and the role that enterprise architecture plays in our organization. We have ramped up our open digital platform. We have our big data lake. We have started to connect the data. We have a scalable model we can deploy by the press of a button. We have agile teams in our corporate marketing, IT, as well as in our e-commerce organization. We are clear on where to run waterfall and not. And we see an increased output, but we also see an increased satisfaction within adidas from an internal employee perspective, but also we see already benefits when it comes to our consumers and the way how we start personalizing and being consistent in their digital journey at our digital touchpoints. And that's where I truly believe that not only we as IT, but adidas as a whole, we are on good track in becoming the best sports brand in the world, latest by 2020. Thank you.